Director of the Commonwealth Policy Center. The Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So how far does the Second Amendment go? Is the right to bear arms an absolute right? Should you be allowed to own a bazooka or a tank? What about so-called assault weapons, usually automatic rifles with high-capacity magazines? Now, there's been a lot of people who want to blame guns for tragedies, mass shootings in this country, but is gun restriction the solution? Joining us to talk about the Second Amendment and protecting the people's right to bear arms is State Representative Josh Bray. He's introduced BR 171, which would make Kentucky a Second Amendment sanctuary state. Josh, welcome to the program.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really good that you're here. Of course, we're recording in Frankfort, just a few minutes from the Capitol, and the Second Amendment seems to be one of the hottest topics in recent years, really as long as I can remember. Whenever there's a mass shooting or some kind of gun violence, there are calls from the political left to restrict gun ownership, as if that's going to stop whatever crime was perpetrated.
Yeah, and if you look, just take, for example, right now, you know, we're seeing in larger cities across the country, violent crime is spiking, but the gun laws haven't changed. So instead of blaming the defund the police movement, they're talking about coming for the Second Amendment rights. And so what I would consider to be, you know, the Second Amendment is as clear as it could be. The right of the people to bear arms shall not be infringed. But we've got a president who's kind of stoking the flames right now. And so there has been a lot of talk about executive action and regulatory authority over the Second Amendment, and which is why I filed BR 171.
Josh, often I hear people on the left talk about any effort to restrict guns is not meant to harm sportsmen, hunters, target shooters. Is that what the Second Amendment's about? Is it about hunting?
No, I mean, it never has been. I mean, if you look at how it was written, it's for defense of our liberties. I mean, it is our God-given right, you know, according to the Constitution and what I believe, to defend ourselves. And that's why they felt the need to build that into the Second Amendment. Now, my exposure to firearms has been through the lens of a sportsman, you know, avid outdoorsman. My father taught me to hunt. I'm teaching my son to hunt. Yeah. And so, but it's not exclusively to sportsmen's rights. It's our right to protect our own liberty.
The language of the Second Amendment clearly says being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, I'm fascinated with this debate because this amendment goes to the founding of this country. Right. If you remember why we got the Second Amendment, it's because the founding fathers remembered when the British were marching on Concord and Lexington specifically to seize their arms at the armory. They had guns, they had cannons, and they realized that if they could disarm the Minutemen and the colonies, then they could do whatever they wanted.
Yeah, and that's not a unique story to just what the British tried to do to the colonists. If you look back through history, you know, the communist Chinese disarmed the citizens. Joseph Stalin disarmed his own people. Adolf Hitler disarmed his own people so that they couldn't fight back. And the Second Amendment's a lot broader than, like you said, just sportsmen's rights. You know, Section 1 of the Kentucky Constitution says, in part, that all men have an inalienable right to bear arms in defense of themselves and the state.
You know, you brought up some of the most notorious authoritarian dictators of the 20th century and what they did to their people. They first disarmed them, and then they could do whatever they wanted. I've shared this with my kids. I've talked about evil people that come to power and what they do. And they'll say, Dad, that won't happen here. Dad, we're in the United States of America. We live in a free republic. We have accountable representatives, and we can our voices can still sway them, but that'll never happen here. How would you respond to that?
I pray that it never would happen here. And, while I would agree that, hopefully with good representation, it never will happen here, never say never. I mean, if we look at just kind of throughout history and kind of what's going on right now, just take the First Amendment, for example. Yeah. I mean, the President of the United States is calling for Facebook to censor people for misinformation, and the government itself is determining what's misinformation. Yeah. And so we're seeing piece by piece these, it's small bites of liberty kind of being taken away. And that's why I filed BR 171, is because you want to make sure, we're proactive in the legislature. I mean, Kentucky is a Second Amendment state. You take my experience with the Second Amendment, like I said, experience through the lens of a sportsman. But there are millions just like me all across the state.
Josh, did you introduce this bill from what constituents asked you to do, or was this, of course, you're in your second term? First term. Mm-hmm. You represent Rockcastle, part of Madison.
And Garrett County.
Yep. And conservative part of the state, I would say. A lot of outdoorsmen, a lot of people who work with the land, farmers and outdoors type. But is there a Second Amendment movement in your district?
Oh, absolutely. So outside of unemployment, the hundreds of emails and phone calls and messages I've received on just trying to help people with their unemployment, protecting the Second Amendment has been the number one topic amongst my constituents. Like, hey, will you file something about this? Hey, can you do something about this? And so, absolutely.
So where do they see the threat? Is it happening in Garrett County or city government, local government? Where do they see the threat coming from?
Same place that, that I kind of see it. In my part of the state, I don't have to worry about a fiscal court implementing some attack on the Second Amendment or a city doing that. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, my counties have passed, are one of the 113 in the state that have passed similar measures to this.
Yeah, if I could interject, 113 out of 120 mm-hmm. Kentucky counties have passed measures, resolutions essentially saying that we are a Second Amendment community. We're a Second Amendment county. That's astounding.
Oh, absolutely. And so that kind of shows what we were talking about earlier. Kentucky's a Second Amendment state.
So I want to go back to what's causing people to voice their opinion to you. Is it the stuff that's going on in Washington, D.C.? Of course, Democrats are in control of Congress. There's a push by congressional Democrats. There's a push by President Biden. President Biden would like to restrict Second Amendment rights. He is for an assault ban, he calls.
Right.
And let's talk about that for a moment.
Okay.
An assault weapon. How do you define an assault weapon?
Well, that's the $1 million question. And, Biden's own ATF appointee can't define an assault weapon. Yeah. To me, there's no such thing as an assault weapon. I mean, I can assault anybody. I mean, I can assault somebody with a wrench. I mean, so is that an assault wrench? I mean, any weapon can be used for ill intent, just the same way any vehicle can be used with an ill intent. Or it just boggles my mind. And so the idea that assault weapons are the problem just kind of makes you scratch your head when you look at the actual statistics of it. Assault, what the ATF describes as an assault weapon or assault rifle, mm-hmm. accounts for less than 1% of all gun violence.
Wow. So when I think of an assault weapon, I think of something that looks like a military-style gun. It may have a handle on the top. It has a large capacity magazine. Often they're black, Kevlar, stock, that kind of thing. But the function of something that looks like that compared to a semi-automatic sporting arm is really not different. A semi-automatic, let's say a 30-06, shoots just as fast or as many rounds as a semi-automatic AR-15.
Right.
The only difference might be how big the magazine is. Well, you can get pretty big magazines for sporting arms as well.
Right. And so this is kind of something that's close to me because you're talking about a semi-automatic 30-06. Well, that's what my deer rifle is.
Yeah.
I've got a Browning BAR Safari, and it's a semi-auto 30-06. I've got a 9-year-old son. He's a smaller frame kid, and he can shoot my AR-15 because it has the collapsible stock. It's lightweight. It's got a round that doesn't recoil overly hard. Whole lot less destructive power than what a 30-06 will do. So it's just they look intimidating, so they must be evil. They must be bad, and I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I think of I'm a hunter too. I grew up hunting. Love the outdoors. I've owned several different kinds of rifles and shotguns, but I think of one of the most potent weapons at close range is a 12-gauge shotgun with a short barrel using buckshot of some kind.
Oh, absolutely.
Because with every pull of the trigger, you're going to have a large range, and there are multiple pellets coming out with each pull of the trigger.
Absolutely. I mean, so
should those be banned? I mean, if you want to talk about assault weapons, technically that could be viewed as an assault weapon.
Let's look at, so let's say the federal government's successful in banning AR-15s. Mm-hmm. If we look at actual actual violence, the vast majority of it's perpetrated by handguns. So do handguns then become assault weapons?
Yeah.
So it's just kind of this never-ending domino effect. We'll start with the high-capacity magazines or AR-15s, and then well, that's not actually the problem because, as a matter of fact, when the 1994 assault weapons ban ended, we didn't see any increase in violent crime or homicides. Actually, we saw just the opposite. Homicides continue to decline, which there's no correlation there to show that assault weapons are a contributing factor to gun violence throughout the United States.
It may make people feel better if a law is passed and if there's some kind of restrictions in place, but what I'm hearing you say is there's no correlation. There's no evidence that shows these type of restrictions are going to actually lead to a decrease in violent crime or mass shootings.
Let's look at the actual data. If we look at the two states in the country with the strictest gun laws, that would be Illinois and California. They account for 15% of all gun homicides. So you take the strictest two places, and out of, they're 4% of the, or 8% of the total states, but they count for almost double the homicide. There's no correlation there that gun restrictions actually provide any sort of safety.
That's a very good point. On that note, if you're just joining us, you're listening to the Commonwealth Matters. I'm Richard Nelson here with State Representative Josh Bray, and we're talking about Kentucky becoming a Second Amendment sanctuary state. Josh has filed BR 171. We're going to take a quick break. Stay there. We'll be right back in just a moment. Welcome back to the Commonwealth Matters. I'm Richard Nelson, Executive Director of CPC, here with State Rep Josh Bray from Rockcastle County. Wait, Rockcastle or Garrett County?
I live in Rockcastle.
You're in Rockcastle, so Rockcastle is just almost due south of Lexington,
right.
South and maybe east a little bit.
Directly south. We're about 40 minutes south of Lexington.
Tell us about your district. What does it look like? The geography, the kind of people. What do your constituents do for a living? What's it like down in that area?
So Rockcastle County, right on I-75. Largest employer is the Rockcastle County Hospital. They provide world-class health care in a rural setting. They are the largest. It used to just be east of the Mississippi, but now it's in the entire country. They're the largest skilled ventilator facility in the country. So that's a big part of it. School system is obviously a big employer in the district, and then I have all of Garrett County as well, which is so Garrett County would be located to the northeast of Rockcastle or northwest of Rockcastle, and then everything west of I-75 along Madison County. So geographically, a very large district, very conservative people. I like to call it God's country. So
it's pretty country. I've been through there in the past, and beautiful country, beautiful rolling hills, and part of it some steep ridges and hollers, and other parts Beautiful area.
Yeah. I'm a little biased, but I wouldn't live anywhere else. So.
So, Josh, you were actually here in the CPC office, I don't know, a year and a half ago. I can't remember when it was exactly, but we interviewed you trying to figure out who you were, what you stood for, and whether or not we could endorse you in your election. And tell the listeners a little bit how you got involved, your background, and then how you got involved in politics.
Sure. So I started off as the city administrator of the city of Mount Vernon, and so what that means is I was the city manager in a mayor-council form of government for the city of Mount Vernon in Rockcastle County. And so I had started, as Mount Vernon started to grow and we were looking to expand economically and get some projects funded, I started to come to Frankfort a lot more and just paying a lot more attention to kind of what was going on. And I felt the real need to get involved, felt like I had a unique perspective with the local government background, and I'm an accountant by trade. That's what I got my degree in, and so very, very conservative, and just felt like I could come to Frankfort and do some good, and so that just got put on my heart and ended up pulling the trigger and haven't looked back since.
You pulled up an upset victory. You defeated an incumbent, which doesn't happen very often in Frankfort politics. Did you have high expectations when you came in, when you first stepped foot into the state capitol? What did you expect?
That first day, it's kind of crazy. So when I was in middle school, was very involved in the Y Club, used to come up here for KYA, and as a 6th, 7th, 8th grader, put on the suit, always too big, and kind of pretend like going, passing the laws and voting on stuff, and then to come in on the first day and get sworn in, I mean, it was just an unbelievable feeling. And still, even today, had committee meetings this morning, pulled, come down the hill, pulled up to the Capitol, and just seeing it and seeing all the history, and it's just, it's unbelievable. Yeah.
It is. It's humbling to step into the Capitol. If the listeners have not been there, many of us haven't, but it's a gorgeous building, marble on the walls, marble columns. Absolutely, it's a breathtaking building, but just to be part of that institution, which you are, as one of 100 state representatives, you're charged with the awesome task of creating public policies, laws that we're all going to live under.
Right.
And of course, we're talking about Kentucky becoming a Second Amendment sanctuary state. Essentially, I want to dig into this a little bit.
Sure.
The language of the bill essentially says this: that no law enforcement agency, law enforcement officer, employee of a law enforcement agency, public agency, and the list keeps going, shall enforce, insist in the enforcement of, or otherwise cooperate in the enforcement of a federal ban on firearms, ammunition, or firearm accessories, and shall not participate in any federal enforcement action implementing a federal ban on firearms, ammunition, or firearm accessories. That's one of, this is about 5 different specific things it does, but that's a big one. Now, one of your colleagues, Joni Jenkins from Louisville, I believe, was critical of this. She was interviewed by another media outlet, and she said that could potentially, I'll just quote from her. This was in Kentucky Today. She said, "I think there are a lot of unanswered questions in there," said Representative Jenkins. "Could be a lot of unintended consequences as we look to preemptively ban laws that aren't even on the books yet." You want to respond to that?
I didn't get elected to come to Frankfort and just sit on my hands while things were happening in Washington that I may agree with or disagree with, in this case disagree with. There's a saying, the best defense is a good offense. And so getting out in front of this is so important. If we look at, I want to read a few quotes from our president right here. No amendment to the Constitution is absolute. Despite the, Second Amendment sounds absolute. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And then if you wanted, or if you think you need to have weapons to take on the government, you need F-15s and maybe some nuclear weapons. Talking about, nuking his own citizens. Now, do I think that's going to happen? Absolutely not. But I mean, we're speaking in hyperbole here. And it's just, Joe Biden has nominated a guy to head up the ATF named David Chipman. And so if the viewers aren't familiar with David Chipman, I highly suggest they kind of look at his past. He was employed by the gun control lobby. Thinks the Secret Service shouldn't have weapons. They've not used them in 50 years, yet they have one of the largest arsenal of weapons. And just supports an assault weapons ban, supports confiscating guns. And so I would disagree that even though there aren't any, quote unquote laws on the books, that Kentucky just doesn't need to sit back and let things happen. And this is important because currently, the ATF is reviewing a policy on what they call pistol braces or pistol stabilizing braces. It's something that I own at home. And so by administrative regulation, they can make criminals out of somebody like me, somebody who's never, been arrested or, the worst thing I've ever done is sped on the interstate, and
Wait, I got to interject there. You're allowed to, when you're doing official business, you have that special license plate that says, are you in the 73rd district?
71st.
71st, close. It says H-71, and if you're caught speeding, a state trooper's supposed to let you go because you're in the course of official business. Isn't that right?
That's on the books. Now, I don't have that license plate.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot either. I just want to highlight that. No. I've always found that fascinating. Our lawmakers can break the law, but anyways, I digress.
So I didn't get that license plate because, a multitude of reasons. But it's kind of crazy to think about what could be coming through administrative regulation or executive order. And that's really what this bill takes care of.
I want to go on with another statement that Johnny Jenkins made. Again, your colleague in the State House representing the Louisville, part of a district in Louisville. She said, our law enforcement could be acting in a way, and she's referring to if this bill is passed, if BR 171 is passed, our law enforcement could be acting in a way that they could be criminally liable for official misconduct if they don't comply with this. I think that we've heard this reasoning for 20 or more years. We've never heard this happen under multiple different administrations. So she's suggesting if this passes and if law enforcement cannot enforce, state or local law enforcement cannot enforce the federal law, that they could be criminally liable.
And I would disagree with that. The 10th Amendment of the Constitution is the separation of powers amendment. And what it says is that states have all rights that aren't explicitly given to the federal government. And so there was a case decided by the Supreme Court. It was Prince versus the United States. And it was actually what the decision was, the federal government had violated the 10th Amendment when Congress required state and local officials to perform background checks on people buying guns. And so that come about because there were some sheriffs in Idaho, I believe, that didn't want to enforce this, federal mandate. And so they chose not to, and the Supreme Court ruled in their favor. So I don't see how, by the state exerting its constitutional rights, we could, she may not like the law, but I don't see how we could find, official misconduct.
Representative Bray, there is a groundswell of support from across the state as 113 out of 120 Kentucky counties have enacted similar resolutions supporting the idea of becoming a Second Amendment sanctuary county. 6 cities have adopted this similar language. 17 states, including those surrounding Kentucky, Missouri, Tennessee, and West Virginia, are considered Second Amendment sanctuary states. Is there support in the state legislature for this?
Oh, I feel positive. If you look, last year, Representative Thomas Huff had filed a bill with similar language in it. And I don't know exactly how many co-sponsors it had, but the last time I checked, it seemed like it was over 30. So I feel like the support's there. I would like to see the General Assembly take a proactive measure to make sure our Kentucky sends a message that Kentucky's a Second Amendment state.
If this bill is passed, of course it's just a pre-filed bill right now, it's BR 171, What would be the enforcement mechanism to make sure that local law enforcement or the state level law enforcement isn't executing what is viewed as an unconstitutional Second Amendment infringement? How would you ensure that that's not happening?
Okay, that's a very good question, and it's something we're actually working through now. So we pre-filed this bill to get the conversation started, and so we're having those discussions behind the scenes, whether that's through the Attorney General's office, through the judiciary, just getting that started so that we know where we are, where we can go, and how we can do it.
Are you getting feedback from constitutional lawyers on the constitutionality of something like this?
Absolutely. Like you said, 17 other states have filed this same concept of the bill. The bill here that we are discussing, BR 171, was actually modeled after a bill that Montana had passed this past session. And so we're, yes, that's all being done. And so the United States Supreme Court is actually, over their next session, supposedly getting ready to take up some Second Amendment issues. And so the hope is that there's a lot more clarification on that. You know, we feel like they're going to strike down a whole lot of unconstitutional gun restrictions throughout the country.
What would be, I want to go back to the impetus behind this, the ban on assault, so-called assault weapons are mass shootings. What would be the solution to mass shootings? And they are relatively rare. It's tragic, and I don't want to undermine the tragedy and the trauma that happens. But what would be a better response in another way other than restricting gun rights? That's the billion-dollar question.
You know, you're right. They're absolutely tragic. It happens too frequently. You know, we've not heard, luckily we've not heard as much of that going on here recently, except in larger cities. But I don't have an answer for that, just to be honest with you. I mean, it's kind of like, how do you solve a murder problem? Well, we've already made murder illegal.
Yeah.
You can't make it double illegal. If you look at what Thomas Jefferson said on gun restrictions, and if you don't care, I'd like to read this.
We got just a minute.
Yeah, he says, the law that forbids the carrying of arms are laws of such nature they disarm only those who are neither inclined nor determined to commit crimes. Such laws make things worse for the assaulted and better for the assailants. They serve rather to encourage than to prevent homicides, for an unarmed man may be attacked with greater confidence than an armed man. So I think Jefferson would say, give everybody a gun, but to me, an assault on the Second Amendment doesn't do anything but punish your law-abiding citizens.
Josh Bray, thank you so much for your time.
Hey, thank you, Richard.